All right, let's get started, inshallah. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. All right, so just start with recitation, inshallah, to get everyone acclimated. I'm just using a fancy word for quiet. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We left off at section 21, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 168, says, Ya ayyuhan nasu kulu mimma fil ardi halalan tayyiba. Said, O people, eat from what is lawful and good on the earth. So Allah is saying that He's reminding people that, listen, whenever you eat, you should be eating from the things that are on the earth. So many foods have been made available for you on earth. And what should you eat from? Eat from what is halal. And the word halal means lawful, intrinsically. And tayyib. Tayyib means good or pure or clean, something that is considered to be good food. So Allah gives two primary things. He says, people, remember, make sure that whatever you eat, it's going to be lawful and it's going to be tayyib, meaning it's going to be pure. It's going to be good food that you're eating. So in this context, the scholar said, the word halal in this context in particular refers to things which you're allowed to eat in the sense that they belong to you. You're not taking somebody else's property. Because the word halal, sometimes it refers to like meat and food that's classified as halal. But that's a very specific term. A more general term, halal means permissible. And the opposite of halal is haram, which means impermissible. There's many things that can be, many non-food items can be halal, non-food items can be haram. So in this context, halal means something that you're allowed to eat in general. And then tayyib means something that's actually good and pure and clean for you. So Allah is explaining two different ways in which your food can become tainted. Number one, it's not lawful because you acquired it unlawfully. And number two, there's something intrinsically wrong with it. And therefore Allah has told you not to eat those type of things. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. And do not follow Satan's footsteps. So don't follow in the pathways of shaitan and Satan, of Satan. So how is that connected to the food part? Because what is shaitan going to do? He's going to whisper to you and say, you know what? Try to eat something that's not halal. Or try to eat something that's not tayyib. Try to eat food that is filthy or that's impure. And one of the ways in which food used to be impure was they would go and they would sacrifice animals to their idols. And what they would do is when you do something like that, now your food, even if it was pure, you've caused it to be tainted. So it becomes impure. Or you could be eating something that's actually impure in and of itself. So that would mess up the food that you're eating. You're saying, don't allow yourself to be whispered to and be tricked into doing something like this. إِنَّهُ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. He is truly your open enemy. Who is he? Shaitan. So Allah is making it very clear that look, number one, make sure you be careful with what you eat. Number two, Shaitan is going to try to trick you into eating things that you should not be eating. And number three, remember that he is your enemy. And you should always be on guard. So if someone's your enemy, they're constantly, you know that they're plotting against you. What do? You're alert, you're vigilant, you're aware. You're thinking, you know what, how am I going to get tricked? And that's a very important thing to do, right? This idea of being careful of your enemy is something that wise people do. If you know that shaitan's going to try to trick you, you're going to be aware and you'll be like, you know what, let me make sure I'm going to check the ingredients of this food before I eat it, because I can easily get tricked. Let me ask the question, is this food actually pure or is there some impure ingredients in there? So it's something that we should be careful about because the shaitan is there always ready and trying to trick us. trying to convince us to potentially make an excuse for ourselves and eat something that could be impermissible. So Allah starts by giving some advice with regards to food. إنما يأمركم بالسوء والفحشاء وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. He, meaning Shaitan, only incites you to commit evil and indecency. So what is Shaitan's primary goal in his role? He's going to get you to do something which is bad. Su. Su is anything that's bad. Wal fahsha. Fahsha means something that is bad, but it's like indecent, it's immoral, it's a shameful type of thing that you should not be doing. So something is wrong with this behavior, and that you say or claim against Allah what you do not know. So the second, so Shaitan is going to whisper to you to do certain things, and one of them is so that you say something about Allah and it's not true at all, and it's actually insulting to Allah. For example, an insulting doctrine, believing that Allah has partners, believing that Allah has children, believing that Allah is not all powerful, believing that Allah cannot do anything. These are all insulting things to Allah. And what knowledge do people have about this? They don't have any knowledge. They don't have any basis for believing these things. So this is a whisper that's going to come from Shaitan. And also there's a context of, we were just talking about food. And they say, don't let Shaitan trick you into eating unlawful food. So here, in this context, it means that there are falsely prohibited practices as well. We're going to get to this later on when we continue tafsir. But there's another thing that the idol worshippers used to do. There's two things they used to do. One is they would take their animals. They would sacrifice the animals in the name of their idols. And now that meat becomes prohibited. You cannot eat that. So even if you take a cow, and a cow should have been lawful, but then you dedicate this cow to an idol. You're not allowed to eat that. The second thing they would do is they made up this strange practice in Arabia, that the pagan Arabs. They said if there's a camel, and the camel gives birth to this many children in a row, and they all happen to be female, or they happen to be male, or something like that, that's a special cow. And now that cow, or that camel has to be left to wander around and nobody's allowed to touch it. It is a sacred cow. No one can eat it. No one can slaughter it. So this is a false practice. Somebody comes along and says, if this thing happens, then this is a special cow. Like in India, the cows are holy. You cannot sacrifice them. You cannot eat them. When they cross the road, the cars have to stop. And they have to wait for the cow to move, and you're not supposed to honk at it. You're not supposed to shoo it away. You have to wait. The whole traffic is going to be blocked up because the idea that the cow is sacred, you have to leave it there. So the same thing happened in Arabia. In Arabia, they had certain sacred camels. And it said these camels become sacred and you're not allowed to eat them. You're not allowed to touch them. You can't do anything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commenting on that and saying, you know what? This is Shaitan who's telling you to claim things against Allah that you have no real basis. What's the basis for that? Someone just made it up. Someone just said, you know what, if this happens, then this camel becomes, special. You can't touch it. So sometimes Shaitan is going to trick you into eating prohibited food and you shouldn't eat it. And sometimes Shaitan is going to trick you into thinking that food is prohibited, but it's not. There's no basis for it. And it's perfectly fine to eat it. So he's going to get you both ways. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling out both practices. And then he says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اتَّبِعُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ قَالُوا بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا أَلْفَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. When it is said to them, it's referring primarily to the idol worshippers, but it's general for everyone. When it is said to people, follow what Allah has revealed, what Allah has sent down, their response is no. We're going to follow what we found our ancestors doing, what we found our forefathers doing. We're going to do what our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, whatever religion they were following, that is the religion that we're going to follow. So what is Allah's response to that? أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. Would they still do that, even if their ancestors had no intelligence or guidance. And by intelligence here, he says ya'qilun. Aql means cleverness, right? Intelligence. He says, what if your forefathers, what if your ancestors, they were not wise people and they didn't think properly? You're still gonna follow them? And what if wala yahtadun and they were not guided correctly? Would you still follow them? It doesn't make sense. So what Allah is doing is calling out, in the field of argumentation, they have different fallacies, right? They have like informal fallacy and straw man fallacy and different ways to spot what is a weak argument. And one of the most common arguments for all types of religions throughout the history of the world, including today, is, well, our ancestors used to follow it. And if our ancestors, our parents, and our grandparents, if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for us. And that becomes our reason for doing it. And Allah is basically saying, this is a fallacy. This is not how you follow things. It should be common sense to the average person that for two reasons. Number one, what if they were wrong? Like, can your ancestors be potentially wrong? Of course they can. And number two, if you assume that your ancestors are right, and another group of people with contradicting beliefs believe that their ancestors are right, and another group of people with contradicting beliefs to both of them believes that their ancestors are right, how can they all be right at the same time? And this is the strange paradox that we live in today. We have two types of blind following. One type of blind following is people who simply say, you know what, we blindly follow whatever our ancestors did. Same religion. Our parents did it, our grandparents did it, our great-grandparents did it. It's good enough for us. That's good enough reason. Then we have the other thing, which I've mentioned before. We have this strange idea of perennialism. And perennialism basically says something even stranger than this idea of blindly following. And that is that all of you can follow your ancestors in what they do, and you're all equally correct, even when they contradict each other. So the contradictions between all of them are all equally correct in some way, and they give some weird examples, like if you have a diamond and you shine a light through it, and you see that, you know what, these lights, the beams of light shine out differently, but they all connect back to the same diamond. You're like, wow, that's beautiful. But that has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that one thing contradicts the other and both cannot be true at the same time. So you'd be surprised at how many people today, how many intellectuals believe in something like this. And you think, how could someone believe in something that's so strangely contradictory? It doesn't make any sense. This is exactly what people used to believe throughout history. They used to also believe that it's a good enough reason to say our ancestors did this, so it's good enough for us. The response of the Qur'an is, this does not make any sense, and it's not a valid argument to respond when somebody tells you, this is the truth, you should follow it. You say, but this doesn't align with what my ancestors follow. Therefore, that's my reason for not being able to follow. The response of the Quran is, you have to use two litmus tests in order for something to be true or false. Litmus test number one is aql. You have to use your brain a little bit. La yaqilun. What if they didn't use their minds and they were not intelligent? You're going to follow someone who's not intelligent? Wala yahtadun, from the word hidayah. If someone doesn't have hidayah, doesn't have guidance, and here in this sense, talking about divine guidance or correct guidance, following the right path, these are the two measures for anything to be correct. It has to have reason, it has to make sense. And number two, it should be in line with what is the right path according to Allah, according to God. So this is the problem throughout history. This idea of ancestral wisdom has always been the basis for many religions and many religious practices. Islam says, no, you should not blindly follow. There should be reason and revelation that supports what you're doing. And the second thing is, it's talking about the idea of intelligence. Allah is redefining intelligence. So intelligence is saying, you know what? If your ancestors were able to build pyramids and they were able to raise armies and they were able to make a lot of money with trade and business and all of that stuff, that's not actual intelligence. Real intelligence is being able to understand what the certain signs are actually pointing to. So I think I've mentioned this, quite a few times before. But this idea of not being guided correctly. Let's say you're on a hiking trip with somebody, and you really respect the person, and they take on a map and they're guiding you along the trail, and you're going and you're wandering around, you feel like I think we're getting lost. I don't think we're going on the right way. The person says, "Don't worry, I got the map right here." Then you look at the map, you realize this is a map of the wrong hiking location. It's a map of the wrong place. It's a completely different place. Now, if you say, you know what, but this person, I respect them so much. This is my grandfather. But your grandfather's using the wrong map. You can respect him and you can love him, but he's not using the correct map. Would you still follow him just because of your love and your admiration and your respect for him? That would make no sense at all. So this is exactly what Allah is telling us here in the Quran. In the next verse, He says, وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا كَمَثَلِ الَّذِي يَنْعِقُ بِمَا لَا يَسْمَعُ إِلَّا دُعَاءً وَنِدَاءً. The example of the disbelievers is like one who shouts to what cannot hear except a call and a shout. Basically, it's like, you know what? The Muslims are being told that the people that you're talking to at that time in Arabia, they're not following the religion of Islam. And every time you try to explain something to them, you try and tell them, hey, don't blindly follow. Think about what makes sense. You know, this religion makes sense. You know, worshiping idols doesn't make sense. Every time you talk to them, it's like talking, as we say in English, it's like talking to a wall, right? Here, it's like talking to some creature that doesn't understand. So you're sitting there, you're like, look, I'm explaining this to you. This doesn't make sense. This is a fallacy. Do you understand the problem? And it's like the person, if you can look at it from their perspective, they're just hearing sounds. Sounds are coming in, but the words are not resonating with them at all. So this is comfort to a Muslim, because a Muslim's like, it's so obvious. Something is wrong with worshiping idols, worshiping other people. Something is wrong with this idea. Why aren't these people getting it? And Allah now is appealing to the Muslims and saying, look, understand the reason why they're not getting it is literally going one ear out the other. They're just, it's as if there's the example, they're hearing sounds, but nothing is processing inside. So that's what's exciting. They're not understanding even what you're saying. No matter how you say it, they're not going to understand it. So it's not about you not conveying the message. It's about their inability to hear, because that frustrates you. Sometimes you're talking to someone, you're trying to explain to them, they're just not getting it. No matter what, the problem in this case is not the way in which you're explaining it. It's the person who's listening. They are deaf, dumb, and blind to the truth, and they do not have any understanding. So we've seen this before, right? The same kind of phraseology that was used before, we're seeing it again. The next verse. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. O believers, eat from the good things we have provided for you. So very similar, now it's talking about food, and it's saying eat from طيبات. So the word طيب meant good and pure. طيبات, now it's plural. Eat from the good things, ما رزقناكم. What was the previous verse just a few verses ago? What's on the earth? So the first verse was a focus on look how many things that are out there. You have so many options out there on earth. Now the focus is رزقناكم. We provided that for you. It's not that it just happens to be on earth, but where to come from. It reminds you that Allah is the one who gave you all these provisions. He gave you all these food options that you're allowed to eat from. وَاشْكُرُوا لِلَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ إِيَّاهُ تَعْبُدُونَ. And give thanks to Allah if you truly worship Him. So if you're really going to worship Allah, then give thanks to Allah, right? So while you're eating your food, and while you're searching for food, remember to thank Allah, because He's given you so many potential food options out there. If you just think about how many things we can eat, it's an amazing thing. Imagine if you had to eat the same meal every single day. It would be challenging. You wouldn't enjoy it. But we have so many potential things that we can eat. That's a blessing from Allah. We should thank Him for that. إنما حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل به لغير الله. He is only forbidden you, He meaning Allah, He is only forbidden you to eat meita, which is a dead animal, blood, swine, and what is slaughtered in the name of other than Allah. He's mentioning a few categories here. We're going to come back to it in a moment. فَمِنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ. But if someone is forced by necessity, neither seeking pleasure nor exceeding the need that they need to have to eat right now, they will not be sinful for that. Inna Allah ghafurur rahim. Surely Allah is most forgiving and most merciful. So if we look at this, this is important. So the first category, Allah is saying, look, He's only forbidden these things for you. That when He says innama, only, it doesn't mean there is absolutely nothing else on planet Earth that is forbidden for you besides what's here. Some people, some Muslims, unfortunately, they read this verse and they say, I know what innama means, and I see the word only. Only means only, there's absolutely nothing else that could possibly be forbidden besides what's in this category. That's not the context here. The context here, it's referring to practices that people started saying, you know what, this other camel is forbidden and this other thing is forbidden. It's a response to a context which existed at the time. And Allah is saying, you know what, you guys have forbidden all these things? No, actually here are the main things that He's forbidden. Okay, the number one, meta, a dead animal. So what is a dead animal? It's going to be defined in more detail later on. A dead animal is an animal which has died and was not slaughtered. Slaughtered meaning that the blood did not drain out of that animal through a cut, through a natural cut. So there's two types of ways that this can happen. If you take a domesticated animal like a cow or a sheep, right? If that animal falls off a cliff, how did it die? Died from the impact. If it dies from the impact, has internal injuries and it dies, it was not slaughtered, the blood did not come out, you're not allowed to eat that animal. If you say, okay, well, I found it now, now that I found it, I'm going to take out my knife and I'm going to cut it. Does it make it halal? No, because it already died, so it died a death where it was not actually slaughtered and the blood was able to come out at the time. Likewise, if you're driving a car, you hit a deer, roadkill, you cut it later on into pieces. Are you allowed to eat it? No, because it's meta. Meta means carrion or a dead animal which died. If it dies naturally, if it dies of illness, are you allowed to eat that animal? No, you can't eat that animal because it was not slaughtered. So there's many different ways that an animal can die. One of the ways which was very common in Britain to kill their chickens, what they would do is they would simply take the chicken and they would actually snap its neck. And after snapping its neck, then they chop it up and then eat it. Is this meta or not meta? It's meta. It's a dead animal because it was not slaughtered. So you say, okay, well, what's the reason? What difference does it make if you cut its neck before it dies or after it dies? What's the difference? It's a very simple difference. While it's living, if you slaughter its neck, all the blood, the heart is still beating. The blood is going to start to be pumped out of its body because the blood is still flowing. If it dies, you strangle it, for example. If you strangle an animal, this was a very common way of killing animals in the past. If you strangle an animal, it'll die. And then you wait a little bit and then you cut it. The blood is not going to start flowing out because the blood starts to solidify within the veins and it's not going to come out. So the idea of slaughter and the idea of a dead animal being meta and why you're not allowed to eat it has to do with the inability of the blood to come out. That's the whole purpose behind why you slaughter an animal. So this is forbidden for Muslims. Meta. There's a common confusion that some people have. They're like, well, what if you say Bismillah before you eat it? It doesn't make any difference. If something is forbidden for you, you can say Bismillah 100 times on it. It does not make it halal, right? There's a hadith about it. I wrote an article on it. I don't want to get into details, but it doesn't, something that's haram, forbidden for you, cannot all of a sudden become halal after the fact that it's already prohibited for you. Next one is waddam and blood. So when it comes to blood, you're not supposed to be eating blood or drinking blood. Why? Because blood is, it's impure. It's, remember we just talked about what is Shaitan going to do? He wants you to eat things which are not pure. So one of them is blood. This idea of eating blood or something like that, this is not going to be allowed. So then the question comes, is what about raw steaks? This is not a fit class, so I don't want to go into too much details, but I'm going to give you a little bit of detail, okay? Blood, this has actually been explained later on in other places in the Quran and in Hadith, that we're talking about the blood that has come out of the animal. Now, a little bit of blood that has remained after a correct slaughter, that's remained inside mixed in with some of the meat, that's considered to be overlooked, okay, according to scholars and according to Islamic scholarship. So if you're going to eat a kind of a raw steak and there's like some blood in there, you're still allowed to eat it. If you're going to eat liver, some blood in there, you're still allowed to eat it. But we're talking about blood that is poured forth and come out of the animal. Number three, وَلَحْمَ الْخِنْزِيرِ, swine, basically the meat of a pig. So pig meat is not allowed. And by extension, they said not only is it the meat of a pig, but it's actually all parts of a pig. So then why did Allah say the meat of the pig? I didn't translate it that way, but it's actually لحم الخنزير, it's the meat of a pig. So some people come along and say, well, it's only meat. Well, the reason why is because in language, you talk about the most prominent part of a thing and you're referring to the entire thing. So if you say, you know what, I don't want to see your face. You say, oh, okay. So I'll just cover my face and you can see my arm and you can see my leg and you can see my body. I'm going to keep talking to you and I'm just going to cover my face up because, you only said you don't want to see my face. I said, no, your face represented you. And when I said, I don't want to see your face, I don't want to see you. So the same thing Allah is part of the language. Allah says, don't eat the meat of pig. Most people are going to eat meat, but it means don't eat anything else, whether it's a fat or whether it's oil or whether it's skin or whether it's hair, whatever else may be there, right? So you're not allowed to eat any parts of a pig. And interestingly, this is something that has been there in the Bible as well. So in the Old Testament, regardless of what Christians have been doing, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 11, verse 7, it says, and the swine is unclean for you. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 14, verse 8, and the swine, it is unclean for you. You shall not eat of its flesh, nor shall you touch its dead body even. It's also in the book of Isaiah, it's in the book of Matthew, it's in the book of Peter. So if you just look at the English language, it's so interesting, right? When you want to say, what are the following, if you called somebody a hog, positive or negative? Negative. Call someone a pig. Negative implications, right? Why? Because usually it refers to the pig's dirty habits. And it's known that a pig has dirty habits. In fact, the pig is known to eat its feces. In fact, it's known to eat other people's feces. There is something called pig toilets. They used to be very prominent in India as well as in China. And they still exist in, I think it was Goa, I forgot. I researched this a while back. So what they would do is people would actually go to the toilet and there's pigs down there and they're going to eat whatever comes down, right? So that's one of the few or only animals that actually does something like this, right? So usually when you call somebody a pig, you're referring to someone who's low, someone who's greedy, someone who's selfish, something that's dirty, right? That's what you're generally referring to. So even built into the language is idea of something gross or repulsive about a pig coming in the language where Christians are eating pigs, despite their book telling them not to, right? They're still doing that. So it's so interesting that that's naturally built into the nature of a person, actually, if you just think about it, had it not been normalized and propagated. So that's why Allah said in the previous verses, eat from the tayyibat, eat from the good things, the pure things, things which are generally good for you, have a good spiritual way of affecting your body. Number three, وَمَا أُهِلَّ بِهِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. And in this context, and whatever is been slaughtered or dedicated in the name of other than Allah, like these idols that they used to slaughter their animals for, you're not allowed to have any of them. So this is what's forbidden for you among some of the animals, some of the things when it comes to food, you're not allowed for you. But if you're forced by necessity, you are stranded in the middle of the desert. You're hiking and you were following that guy with the wrong map, the wrong location, and now you're stuck and it's nighttime and like we have no food, we have nothing else, and the only thing there happens to be one of these things. The only thing that would actually work, either an animal dedicated to someone else besides Allah or a pig or something like that. Allah says you're allowed to eat that. You're not going to be sinful for doing that as long as, غير باغٍ. You didn't kind of put yourself in that situation. You're not the one who switched the maps and you're like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to try pork. So you're not playing around, you're not playing games, and wala adin, right? And you're not exceeding what you need. So you're like, you know what? We only need a few bites to survive. And you're like, but since we're in the situation, might as well eat a bunch of stuff. No, you don't do that. As long as you do that, you will not be sinful. Allah is most forgiving and Allah is merciful. Allah is not going to hold you accountable. So technically, if you're not going to be sinful, there's no need for forgiveness from Allah. But what this does, it reminds us that morality, the basis of morality is Allah. Allah defines and decides what's going to be rewarding and what's sinful. It's not intrinsic. It's not the idea of intrinsic. It's because Allah made it that way. He chose it to be that way. And that's why He puts the emphasis on Allah is forgiving you in that situation because He's the one who decides whether He could have held you accountable. If Allah wanted to test us, what could He have done? It could have been like, this is your test, whether you're going to die for the sake of Allah or not. You're going to sit there and you're going to starve. Out of mercy, Allah said, you know what, in this case, go ahead, you're allowed to do that. This shows you the leniency that Allah has, the mercy that Allah has, and many, many rules of Islam are built upon this. People who think Islam is a very strict religion, or this is all these rules, by the way, when you combine them together, they're called Sharia. Sharia means the Islamic way of life with all the rules. Look at the mercy in the rules. Something that's so repulsive and abhorrent like pig, right? Or an animal that's been dedicated to an idol. Allah's telling you in the Qur'an, you know what? If it's a situation where it's really a dire need, you can even do that too. You don't find other religions having a principle like that. Then the next verse. إن الذين يكتمون ما أنزل الله من الكتاب ويشترون به ثمنا قليلا أولئك ما يأكلون في بطونهم إلا النار. Those who hide what Allah revealed in the book. And remember, this is referring to the Jews in Medina. We were talking about in some of the Christians in that area. Whoever hides what was revealed in the book about the coming prophet and about Islam, and they trade it for a small price. Meaning, they go and they sell this book. We've seen this before too. They consume nothing but fire into their stomachs. So now look what it's saying. It's saying basically, you used your religion to cover up the truth and get some money because of it. And when you get that money, what are you going to do? You're like, oh, I got some money. I got some gifts. I got some bribes. I got whatever it is. You're going to use that money to buy some food. You're going to buy some other stuff. He's saying that money that you think is going to benefit you, it's actually fire coming into your stomach. So Allah is coming back to the previous point that He was making about concealing something in Revelation. And He just talked about food. So now He ties the two of them together using the language of they're just consuming fire in their stomach. And they're saying, you know what? That is worse than the unlawful food we just talked about. What's worse than eating all that other stuff is going and deceiving other people, concealing the truth, and then you go and you bring that into your stomach. That's even worse than that. وَلَا يُكَلِّمُهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Allah will neither speak to them on the day of judgment. And then there are verses where it says Allah is going to say to those sinners, you this and you that. So the explanation is, meaning He's not going to speak to them kindly. He's going to ignore them for a while, and then He's going to speak to them harshly because of what they deserve on the day of judgment. Nor will He purify them. What does it mean, nor will He purify them? Do they need a shower? They can be dirty. Purify in this context on the day of judgment means He will not remove their sins. He will not purify their sins through forgiveness. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And they will suffer a painful punishment. So Allah talks about what's going to happen to these people when they're concealing the signs. أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى والعذاب بالمغفرة. They are the ones who traded guidance for misguidance, referring to what happened in this world. So they concealed the signs, they got some money. It's like, this is the worst kind of bargain you could do. It's using economic language. So you go and you buy something. You're like, you know what? Hey, I would like to give you $100 for this broken product, which is worth like $1. Imagine someone goes in there and they buy something and it's completely useless, it's broken, you spend $100 on it. You're like, that was the worst transaction ever. Imagine your child goes and does something like that. They get $100 for Eid, and then they go to the store, somebody rips them off. You're like, you bought a piece of candy for $100? Like, really? You bought a chocolate bar for $100? You'd be like, this is the worst deal ever. This is exactly what Allah is saying. This is what these people are doing. They're trading guidance. They knew that the religion of Islam is true. They knew that the Prophet is coming. And when they get for it, they got misguidance in exchange. And they traded forgiveness for punishment. Meaning that Allah can purify them, as I mentioned in the previous verse. Allah can purify them with forgiveness if they've been sincere. But what did they get? They're going to get punishment instead in the next life. Is this the worst deal you could ever make? This is a wording in Arabic which basically means it's amazing that they are ready to patiently endure the fire, because they're going to be punished for this. So it's like the way Allah is saying is using the sarcasm. These people are so prepared and so ready to be able to jump into the fire. It's amazing. We don't see anybody like that. So it's basically mocking them. It's like, what a ridiculous deal that you've made in doing something like this. In the last verse, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ نَزَّلَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ. All of that is because Allah has revealed the book in truth. وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِي الْكِتَابِ لَفِي شِقَاقٍ بَعِيدٍ. Surely those who differ regarding it are extremely divided. Right? What does that mean, extremely divided? There's two interpretations scholars give. One of them means that they're divided, that they're so far away from the truth. And the other explanation that they give is that they're extremely divided amongst themselves because they're all coming up with all sorts of different ways of trying to get away from the truth. There's so many wrong paths out there. And there's one correct path. So if you're not on the right path, there's so many ways you can be going in the wrong direction. There's only one way you can go in the right direction. It's like the hiking example I was giving, right? There's one correct map of that place. There is hundreds of incorrect maps, which are not going to take you to where you need to be going. And that's what happens when people go away from the truth. They're extremely divided among themselves. And when you're comparing, they're like, what's your map say? What's your map say? They're all different because there's so many different ways to go on the wrong way. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to understand these verses and apply them in our lives. Are there any questions? There's my question slide. Any questions? Yeah. Oh, so okay. So the question is, what is in the Christian texts that made it okay for them to eat pork? Well, basically, Paul said that we don't need to follow the law anymore. So basically, all the rules that were there are completely wiped out. So basically, none of the rules are there, which is ironic because they still do follow some of the rules, because it wouldn't make sense for them to wipe out all of the rules. But what happened was, because he made that statement, he said, we don't need to follow a lot of them. Whatever they didn't want to follow, they didn't follow. And whenever they said this is like such a core rule, how can we possibly remove that? We're going to keep that in there. Like the 10 Commandments, things like that. Well, if you're going to abrogate everything, abrogate everything, right? But that's what happened. So Paul came along and instituted that. And that's why there was a split in the early church between people who never said that they were Christians. They said, we're Jews who are following Jesus, who's one of our prophets, which is kind of closer to what Islam was. Then later on, the people who followed Paul, and then they said they kind of formed this church, they followed his teaching where he said, we don't need to follow any of the law. You follow the spirit of the law, you don't need to follow the letter of the law. All the letters, all the rules are gone. Spiritually, you're following what you consider to be clean. Yeah. Say the verses again? Yeah. I'll just give you the numbers so you can look them up. Leviticus 11:7, Deuteronomy 14:8, Isaiah 65:4, Matthew 7:6, and the second book of Peter 2:22. Isaiah 65:4. This is all being recorded, by the way. It's going to be on YouTube. Check the YouTube at the end. Inshallah. Yes. Yes, it's a good question. So this last verse here, نزل الكتاب بالحق. So he's saying he revealed the book. So when Allah says the book, depends on the context. So the book sometimes means the Qur'an, sometimes it means the previous revelation, and sometimes it means all of the books combined in one because they're all teaching the same teachings, right? So in this case, we can probably say it's referring to all of the books together. Yeah. Yeah, according to this, yes. So when it comes to exactly. So when it comes to the gospel, they're according to, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When it comes to the books of Paul, who wrote the majority of the books of the New Testament, they're not the words of Jesus in the first place. They don't even claim to be the words of Jesus, they're the words of Paul. No? Question, yeah. Why did they eat stuff that was not slaughtered in the name of Allah and in the name of their idols and stuff like that? So the thing is, with the people who were eating what was slaughtered in the name of their idols, it's because they took their idols as being something special. In terms of people eating meta or dead animals or eating things which are not slaughtered in the name of Allah, it's because they just had the temptation. They said, let's just skip slaughtering in the name of Allah for whatever reason, or it's more convenient for us, and they went ahead and ate it. Yeah, I know. I know what he was referring to in specific, and I was just trying to avoid that question because this is okay. Yeah. So if you're talking about this idea of like the biha meat and like halal meat and all that stuff, that's a long topic, and I don't want to get derailed. But come and ask me afterwards, and I'll answer you directly. So, but the general principle is this: what's a type of meat that you're not supposed to eat for sure? You're not supposed to eat any meat, any food that's been slaughtered in the name of an idol. 100% clear cut. Number two, you're not supposed to eat any meat that has died, has become meta, right? Clear cut. Number three, you're not supposed to eat any meat that has not been slaughtered in a way that is acceptable according to Sharia standards. All of these three things are clear cut. The question is, what are the exact requirements for something to become zabiha or become halal, in order for like an animal to become allowed or not? That's where there's some difference of opinion and there's some discussion among scholars. But it's got to be slaughtered by a Muslim, Jew, or Christian, and then all the details vary. So the details, inshallah, I can answer you privately because that's a whole topic about you get all four jugular veins and you assume in America's a Christian country and blah 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 all that stuff. Okay. Yes. Other questions? Yes. Huh? No, it's not that I want to leave. I don't want to turn this into a fiqh lesson. Yeah. They're praying over the food? I've not seen that. I don't know. Okay. So who are they? They're praying to Allah on the food or what? They're praying to the food? Or they're like making du'as and blessings and stuff.
It's almost like, yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like a Hindu thing. It's,
It's like
okay, okay. Yeah, I mean, I have to. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. If it's resembling something like a Hindu practice or something, we should avoid that. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, no, I've not seen that. But yeah, we should avoid any type of those types. Question. Okay, so you're asking about vegetarian items and dishes that non-Muslims offer you, but you mean that are dedicated to their idols. Is that what you mean? You mean just regular stuff? Yeah. So something that's a food for Diwali or some food that's been, it's called like parast or something like that. Yeah, we should not be eating that food either. That's been even if it's non-meat and it's been dedicated to an idol, we should not be eating any of those food or taking any of those gifts because that's a way of like condoning the ritual that they're doing. So that's the only reason. Yeah, so it depends. There's two types. So there's one is someone's just doing it for their festival, right? If they're just doing it for their festival and they said you send you some food, we make this during our festival, it's fine to eat that. But if they're actually dedicating this food, especially to their gods, there's another term that they used for it that we're not, and they're supposed to go and distribute that stuff out. So I did research on this recently. So they actually do dedicate it to their gods. If they dedicate it to their gods, then you do not accept that food. And you make it very clear that says anything that's been, you ask them, is this been dedicated to your God? Is it termed this? And if it's not, you can eat it. And if it is, you don't eat it. You don't accept it. Yeah.
But it's like something that you like put in a pot and like you heat it up or something and it smokes and then you say something and it's supposed to get rid of like evil eye or something or maybe it's just like close to it.
Yeah, it could be. There's a lot of different cultural practices that people do to get rid of, evil eye and black magic and stuff like that. There's nothing clear cut in Islam that tells you this is a practice. So some people say, one person that told me that like someone got a new car and they say we take a goat and we let the goat walk around the car like 7 times or something like that. I'm like, there's nothing like that in Islam. So this idea of cooking something and then smoke comes out or whatever it is, these are all cultural practices. If it's something that's contradicting to Islam, then we shouldn't do it. If it's just like a way of cooking food and you're just going to eat it, then that's fine. So it's something else. Yeah. So yeah. So that you should take that with a grain of salt and be very careful about it. Okay. Let's see who is not prawns. Prawns? You mean like shrimp? Yeah. Prawns a type of shrimp. Yes. Brother, yeah. Just go ahead. Okay. So this is what I was trying to avoid. The questions about McDonald's and Burger King and all that stuff. So I'll give you the summary answer. Is that Muslim scholars have a difference of opinion in America about whether meat in America is de facto by default halal to eat or not. The assumption is the ones who say that it is, they say this is America is a Christian country and we can safely assume that the meat is coming from Christians. So we're allowed to go and eat from all these restaurant chains and everything like that. The other ones say, one, America is not a Christian country primarily, so therefore we can't assume that. And number two, you don't know who's slaughtering your meat. It could be a Buddhist, it could be Hindu, it could be an atheist, it could be agnostic, and therefore you shouldn't be allowed to eat that meat. So that's really where the difference of opinion lies. Okay, myself, I don't eat from those places because I take that second opinion. But what's important to realize, everybody agrees, all scholars agree on one thing, and that is if you're not in a Christian country, like Sweden, like China, like Japan, people traveling for business all the time. You can't just go to a restaurant and just eat like a chicken burger because it's not a Christian country. You can't even make the argument that it's a Christian country. Number one. Number two, if you know for a fact that a non-Christian, non-Jew, non-Muslim is slaughtering your meat, and you can ascertain that, then you're not allowed to eat that. It doesn't matter what country you live in. So these two principles are agreed upon by everyone. And sadly, there are many Muslims who don't understand this and they break this agreed upon principle, right? So what I try to do is try to tell people at minimum, at least meet the bare minimum threshold of what is considered to be 100% clear cut in Islam. And many people, they don't, because they'll go to a business trip, China, they'll go to the local place, they'll be like, yeah, I'm gonna get a steak, really nice. But China's not a Christian country. And there is Scandinavia, if you look at the population. So you just gotta be careful, we should be more aware of that. Hopefully that resolves that issue. Yes, behind you. Oh, you're talking about cross-contamination between things, yeah. Yeah, we should be careful about cross-contamination as well, yeah. Because you'll mix with the oil and all that. Yeah. The second issue is cross-contamination between pork and other stuff, yeah. Yeah, so we should be careful about that. The Shura Council, Islamic Shura Council of Southern California, they just launched a project that they're going to be going to different restaurants and they're going to be checking to see if there's cross-contamination between pork and things like that in the way that they're cooking. So they're working on this project right now. Yeah, in fact, yeah. Yeah, good question. So question is, if the Christian that's slaughtering your meat, or let's say the Jew or the Muslim, if they're electrifying the chicken, or let's say they're strangling the chicken and it's becoming meta and it's becoming a dead animal, then can you still eat it? The answer is no, you can't eat it. You can't eat it. And this is clear cut. This is what used to happen in Spain. So in Spain, historically, Muslims were living in Spain. There were many Christians over there. So there's many scholars got this question about, well, the Christians, they're a Christian. They're supposed to be slaughtering the animal, but what they're doing is they're actually breaking the neck of the chicken, right? And then they're going to serve the meat. Are we allowed to eat it? Because it's still meat from Christian, Ahlul Kitab. And the answer was no, you cannot do that. Yeah. Correct, yeah. Predatory birds you cannot eat as well, even though it's not mentioned here in the Quran, but they're also prohibited. Correct, and predatory animals too, land animals too. It's coming from the hadith, yes. Authentic hadith on that, inshallah, yes. Correct. So even though the Christians who are Trinitarians, they technically are worshiping another God besides Allah. So the question is, why are we allowed to eat their meat? Because they're still considered people of the book despite that. And people of the book means at least they had an original revelation. So it's not about whether they're pagans or polytheists or not. They are still put in a special category where they originally had some laws. Even the Catholic Church had some level of understanding of how you're supposed to slaughter an animal and all that stuff. Even though that's changed, that's the reason why Allah allowed it. Because they had some remnants of revelation. Yeah. Yeah, so so that's this is kind of what I was saying. So when it comes to like religious festivals, oftentimes they're celebrating the festival for a deity. So for example, Diwali is directly connected to worshiping of one of the gods. I think it was Shiva or something like that. I was gonna write an article on it, I decided not to. But yeah, so that just happened recently. So yeah, that's a good point. But when it comes to like, let's say, Hanukkah or the Jewish festival, or when it comes to like, let's say Christmas, and the Christians, they make, I don't know, some kind of pie or whatever it is. They're like, this is a Christmas pie. You can eat the pie, fine, because it's not connected to a particularly, like you eating that is not celebrating the festival itself. And it was not dedicated to something that is like a god or whatever it may be. So that would be fine. Yeah.
Or like, for example, like Chick-fil-A is like a Christian company.
So that's what this. So this is what I was saying. There's two opinions among scholars, right? So we have an entire debate on this. If you want, I recommend you watch the debate. There's a debate on whether Muslims can eat In-N-Out or not. Because In-N-Out is a Christian company. It's got Bible verses on the shake, on the wrapper, on the fries. If you look very carefully, some people miss it. It's Bible verses there, right? So there's a debate between Sheikh Farhan Zubairi and Sheikh Taha Hassan from San Diego, and it's on YouTube. If you look at the I was the moderator. So if it's in, and you had a group of scholars actually moderating the panel of scholars as well, asking questions. It's a really good debate. It explains this issue in a lot of detail. So just look at like In-N-Out, halal. I think you put my name to Mustafa Umar or IAOC, you'll find it. Sure. It was in IAOC. It was like 8 years ago or something like that. And we served In-N-Out actually afterwards. No. We served In-N-Out without the meat. It's grilled cheese. Okay. Other questions? Any non-meat related questions? So we got to the meat of the matter. All right. So inshallah, we'll see you next week. Inshallah, subhanak Allahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
But I didn't want to accept the question. Am I allowed to eat from Chick-fil-A because the Christian company there, Chick-fil-A?
No, because